All right, up goes the curtain, and we're live again for another Tuesday night webinar on dealing with tantrums. My sound and video should be coming through to you, hopefully fairly loud and clear at the moment. If you haven't participated before in one of these webinars, hopefully you've had a chance to watch some of the recordings that would have come through on the email. Otherwise, just do your best to follow along, and you'll need to go back over those recordings because we've had 5 sessions already. This is number 6. So if you've been with us the whole way through, or a fair chunk of that, well done, congratulations. I think that's a great effort so far. It's been quite an amount of time that you've committed to this. Also, if you're new to the session, or even if you're not, let's just reorient ourselves to the webinar platform. You should see me speaking to you on the right side of your screen. Depending on what sort of device you're on, if you're on a mobile of some sort, won't always work the same way. There should be a visual on the screen, which at the moment is just a title slide. And then somewhere, particularly if you're on a computer, there should be a chat box where you can see people typing and commenting. That's a great way for you to interact with each other and me. So this is a live session, it's not a recording. And we've done that so that we can try and personalize it a bit for you, so that you can participate and interact with the content and with me, and hopefully I can give you a little bit of extra guidance on the kinds of questions you've got, because we don't always know exactly what's going to be a struggle for different people. All right? So this session is all about getting good behavior in the long term. So we're going to be building on what we've already used and trying to add in some stuff that's going to make sure that once we get over tantrums, they're not replaced by something else, or they don't return for some other reason later on. So I think it should be good. Let's crack on. Just a couple of acknowledgements, as I always do. Firstly, we're very appreciative to the Department of Education and Training, or the Victorian Government. These sessions are available openly to everyone around Australia and indeed the world, but they're provided free of charge thanks to funding from the Victorian Government, who have been super supportive of us in doing this. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're meeting tonight. We're meeting in the virtual world, but most of us, I'm pretty sure, still exist in the physical world. If you're in Australia, you will have some traditional owners of the land where we're meeting. So I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people we may have joining us tonight. Now, as I always remind you, what we're offering you in these sessions is fairly general advice. I can try and give you some more specific tips based on your questions, but bear in mind, I haven't done a thorough assessment of your circumstances. If you have particularly challenging behavior, or you're really struggling, or you're really being affected by it in a big way, I really do think you need to get some more individualized support. And there are some options for how you can do that on the screen. If anyone's struggling to do that, let us know and we can try and help you out. Now, an overview of the course, like we always go through, just to remind you of where we're up to and what we're doing, and hopefully kind of consolidate what we've already covered, because we have covered quite a lot, haven't we? Each session, I feel like we're cramming quite a bit in, so I hope it's all sort of registering with you. Session 1 was a level unto itself. It was a very quick-fire overview of the whole course, including some practical tips, which you could start using straight away, and which we've been building on session by session. Then level 2, the next one down, had 3 more sessions in it where we were basically building techniques that would help you to put in place what you needed to do to change tantrum behavior. Now in level 3, which has 3 more sessions, what we're doing is helping you put those techniques into practice. So what we've completed already is 5 of those sessions ticked off. And tonight we're on to getting better behavior in the long term. Next week will be our last session, by the way. Isn't that exciting? We should have some sort of party. You bring the wine, I'll bring the snacks. I'm not sure how that will work online. So let's have a look at where we're up to. We'll do another one of our quick recaps. See if this makes sense to you. If it doesn't, let us know with questions. That's what we're here for, and we'll have 10 minutes towards the end, maybe even more, to go through some of those. Hopefully get to all of them. So we started off this course with tantrums causing a problem. Tantrums attack, tantrums, causing stress, impacting your family, or perhaps some other scenario in which you're interacting with kids who have tantrums. What we did as a result is we decided, right, what's some things we can use to deal with tantrums? We went through a whole lot of them, didn't we? I'm actually just going to turn off my screen so you can see this a bit easier because the writing's a bit small. So remember, we did that. This is just a very quick, broad strokes overview, right? We went through a lot more detail than this, but we did that whole trigger behavior consequence thing, didn't we? We went through how we can work out the purpose of the tantrums from that. We went through trying to change the consequences to influence the behavior. We went through trying to change the triggers. We went through catching a child being good. We went through tracking behavior and targeting it precisely. We went through teaching new skills. That was last week, if you made it to that one. We went through replacement behaviors. That was earlier on. Ways of replacing the tantrums with something else. And we went through giving effective instructions. Hopefully that's all stewing around in your mind there somewhere. If it's very unclear or you're not sure what I'm talking about, you're going to need to go back to some sessions, which you're probably going to need to do anyway, by the way. Just because, don't assume that you can grab all this content, shove it into your mind and do it just with kind of like a one-off exposure. I've tried to reinforce things as much as possible, but realistically, I think you will need to come back and look at sessions again just to refresh your memory, even if you skip to the relevant part. I know I would need to. So we've got all these ideas, but then it comes to tonight, which is like, all right, we're trying to do this now. You've been trying for a few weeks. Hopefully you've got some feedback about how it's going, and it's like, how do I actually make this happen? It's quite a lot to get your head around, even though we tried to keep it simple. And it's never as easy as just doing what I'm telling you to, is it? There's another layer to it, which is how you kind of manage yourself in the process. That is the topic of tonight's webinar mainly. Managing yourself and your family in the long term to try and make sure this better behavior sticks. Now, we're going to kick off with some interaction, and I've got a bit of a question for you. The idea is to get your thinking caps on and type into the chat an answer to this question. What do you reckon is the most valuable thing you will take away from this course? There's not really any right or wrong questions. I'm just interested in your thoughts, and I've got my own thoughts on it, and we'll see if we're on the same page. Okay? So can people type in some answers to that question on your screen? What do you think is the most valuable thing you've got already from this course, or what do you think is going to help you the most? Or do you think the whole thing's a load of crap and it's not going to make any difference? Amanda, you're saying keep it simple. B, how to stay sane. That is interesting. Keep calm in a hard situation. Okay, Shoma. Diverting away from the tantrum cause, Gabrielle. That's a very good point. Patience, Louise. Jack, this is the first one. Don't personalize it, be calm. Okay. Flavia, look at the reason. That's good. You've definitely been paying attention. Getting perspective, Louisa. Nice. How to avoid the behaviors. Yes, Debbie, that's certainly relevant. Try to understand your child's needs, Shama. That's a really good way to put it. I think that's a great kind of summary of the core of what we're trying to get to. How to not make it worse with your reactions, Karen. Okay, keep commenting if you like. Paul, recognizing why it happens and addressing it, that is an excellent thing to take away. And I would be very proud if I was able to help you do that with this course. A lot of you are on the same page as me, actually. I thought more of you would be on a different page, to be honest, but you're all really on the ball, and somehow we've ended up thinking the same thing, which is great. I think the most important thing you'll take away is this idea of confidence. Okay? I'll tell you why as we go through this session. But one of the main things that I hope will be able to help through this course is your level of confidence dealing with your child's behavior, which is actually super important for the outcomes that you get. Now, the challenge is, or why I think this is important, is because when you're faced with something like this, a full-on tantrum, a child screaming at you, it's very easy to feel like things have gone terribly wrong, right? And it's not uncommon for parents to feel like they've failed or they've done something wrong or their family is in a state of ruin because they've got these, what looks very extreme happening. And so it's easy for us to kind of be very affected by tantrums. So not only do tantrums cause problems for the child and for the people around them, but particularly for us as parents, it's sort of a hot button topic. And I want to share with you a little bit of research that really illustrates that point. I don't like to go into too much into research in these talks because I think it slows things down too much, but I thought this was really neat. So I'm just going to describe the study very briefly. So psychologists did a study on parents of children with ADHD. The only reason I bring up ADHD is because it's a condition where kids tend to have more behavior problems than usual. Now, there used to be this theory about the parents' role in kids with ADHD because they'd observed that parents of kids with ADHD are generally less consistent in their response to problem child behavior than parents of kids who don't have ADHD. So in the past, researchers had said, maybe it's something to do with what the parents are doing that is contributing to the ADHD symptoms. If you don't know what ADHD is, don't worry too much. It doesn't matter, really, for this explanation. But the interesting thing that they did in this experiment, good question, Shoma, I'm not going to go into it. It's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's just a particular neurological condition that can occur in childhood that can cause extra difficulties. So what they did is, the interesting part was, the researchers gave medication to a bunch of the kids who had ADHD. And they found that where the medication worked and resolved the ADHD symptoms, so the child behavior improved, the parent consistency improved automatically. They didn't have to tell the parents to do anything different, okay? So why does that matter? It means that it wasn't the parents that were causing the ADHD or contributing to the ADHD. It was the ADHD that was making it harder for the parents to parent the way they wanted. So in other words, difficult behavior had a demonstrated effect on parents' responses. This applies to you. If you've got really difficult tantrums in your family, it will affect your ability to respond the way you want to. So you've got your work cut out for you in dealing with tantrums. This is where confidence comes in. We need to kind of consciously try and reverse that effect. The more difficult your child's behavior is, the more you want to try and be more like a rock, okay? The idea that we're aiming for is to be sort of immovable in the face of your child's tantrums, of all their difficult behavior. So you're calm, you're responding in an unemotional or even faintly pleasant way when your child's having a tantrum or doing something really problematic for you. And you kind of put the problem back on them. The tantrum is really their problem, not yours, although it may be causing you some difficulty. But we want to put it back on them. We're compassionate, but we're not getting into a whole wrestling match with them around trying to change their behavior. Okay? So that's why I've got this image here of the rock. You kind of being calm, no matter what difficult behavior kind of crashes up against you, it doesn't get to you on an emotional level. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. What it might look like, and something that you can practice, maybe in the mirror if you feel like it, is using a half smile. I don't know if you've come across this before. I'll bring myself back on the screen. I call it a Mona Lisa smile. It's often also attributed to the Buddha. But the idea is it's not really a full smile like you're happy. It's just kind of a faint upturn at the corners of your mouth. I'll try and do it now without talking. I feel a bit silly doing it to the camera. But the idea is, you can see it like Mona Lisa is famous because she's kind of smiling but not really smiling at the same time. It's sort of half a smile. That's the kind of, if you can put your face in that position, it's going to kind of lead your own mindset in responding to your child's behavior. So think about the half smile. That's what you want to look like on the outside, and also kind of how you want to coach yourself to feel on the inside. Okay? I'm going to turn my screen back off again now. Is that making sense to people? So I call it the Mona Lisa smile. It's technically more usually referred to as a half smile. But normally, of course, we don't look like Mona Lisa. We look like this. We feel like this on the inside. Which is kind of almost the opposite, right? The difficult behavior, the tantrums, make us feel stressed, maybe outraged, like how can my child be doing this? It's ridiculous. Maybe confused. Why is this happening? There doesn't seem to be anything wrong. Maybe concerned. Is this doing harm to my child? All of those kind of things. So I want us to calm down about that. I want you to feel reassured and confident. And what's going to help that is a whole lot of what we've already covered in this course. All right, let's go through it. Firstly, you've got something to go on about knowing what affects your child. Remember how we did all that work early on kind of assessing your child's environment, trying to work out what's triggering their behavior. So you've got some ammo to go on, some ammo to use here about what affects your child. That might help your confidence. You know a bit about why they react the way they do. We went through those purposes, and I coached you through trying to work out the purpose of your child's behavior. You know a bit about what you can influence and how. Remember, there are some things you can't influence. There's genes that play a role in difficult behavior, including tantrums. But there's some things you can influence. So you probably can't stop them completely. You certainly can't do that straight away, but over time you might be able to influence them to reduce them. And finally, is more this, you may not get this from the course, but it's kind of a sense that you're getting there, that things are basically all right and that they will be. Now, if you don't have that feeling, firstly, that's not unusual. If you feel like, gee, I'm really struggling here, I'm not sure what's going to happen or if things are going where I want them to. If you don't have that, firstly, don't panic. But if it is really a big concern for you, or that's glaring for you, that you feel like this is not going to go well, that's one of those situations where you should really get your own individual advice and support, because I can't really do that for you through the computer screen. So just check with yourself. Do you feel like things are basically all right? You've got this probably a bit of a problem with tantrums happening if you're in this, joining me for this webinar series. But are things basically kind of on track? You don't need to comment on that in chat. It's just for you to kind of ponder. And if that's not the case, think about what can I do about that. Now, just to return to the rock metaphor that I used earlier, just to clarify that, it doesn't mean inaction. You're not going to be passive like a rock. We're still going to do stuff. We're not going to act like the child's not there. It's just that we're not going to be moved on an emotional level. Audio issues for Vicky. I hope it looks like it's okay from my end. But if other people are having lots of problems, let us know. So here's what we need to cover for the rest of the webinar. Firstly, we're going to talk about quality time, what that is, how to do it, why it's important. We're going to talk about managing stress. That's for yourself and for other members of your family. We're going to talk about managing high-risk situations. So this is a bit of a return to a topic that we've done before. We're going to talk particularly about high-risk situations for you being stressed. So before we talk about high-risk situations for tantrums occurring, Now we're going to focus on high-risk situations that really get to you. And finally, we're just going to retouch on using rules effectively, because that can be important in the long term. All right, let's start off with quality time. We just flagged this when we were talking about timeout earlier. What is quality time? It's basically spending time with your children, or with children that you're involved in the care of, for the sake of spending time with them. It's like giving them your attention because you believe that that's a worthwhile thing to do in and of itself. So other times we do interact with our kids lots, but it's for the purpose of getting them dressed, getting to appointments, disciplining them, getting them to school, asking them what they want for dinner, trying to get them to clean their room. Quality time is different to that. It's purposefully setting time aside just to be interacting with each other in a kind of positive, happy way. So it's things like playing games, just sitting down talking to each other, asking how they're feeling, making lots of eye contact, doing lots of back and forth talking. So that's what quality time is. I'm not going to spend too much time explaining that, because I think the term is pretty familiar for most people. But it's super important, okay? On many occasions I work with families where I ask, right, what do you guys do for quality time, just to have fun together? And they're kind of like, and it turns out that that's an area where they really struggle. That's got to be your first port of call. If you're not having any significant quality time with your kids, don't bother with the rest of this course, to be honest with you. Do that first. Get that happening. It's so important. And here's some reasons. For one, it's essential for brain development, particularly in young kids. So if you've got a kid under 3, you need to be spending that quality time, making lots of eye contact, talking to them, responding to the little noises they make. But older kids too, school-aged kids, you need to be interacting with them quite a lot. It's also essential for kids' mental health. So it's very important for things like healthy attachment, which we'll come back to soon. And the third point there, which of course is going to be relevant to you guys, it helps with behavior. Now, you might be scratching your head thinking, well, how does doing fun stuff with my kids help with tantrums? They're not having tantrums when we're having quality time. But here's one way to understand it. It does help. The reason could be that frustrations can add up over time. Remember how we talked about our theory of tantrums being to do with frustration and the child becoming overwhelmed? Well, if your child's getting frustrated a lot, one thing that can help reduce that is quality time. Okay? So the more quality time you have, the more your child is going to be able to deal with frustrating situations. Here's an analogy I like to use. It's called the money in the bank analogy. It's kind of like, think of quality time as putting money in the bank. Every minute that you're spending with your child, watching them draw or talking to them about their favorite toy, it's like money in the bank that you can draw down on later when you really need it, when your child's acting in a difficult way. Okay, so it's like money in the bank. If you're trying to deal with a lot of tantrums, a lot of difficult behavior, and this probably goes for older kids especially, actually, it may be that you don't have enough money in the bank and you need to focus more on building up more quality time. Okay, and especially, this is going to be especially relevant for many of you who identified a potential purpose of your child's tantrums as being to get attention. You can see there's a direct link there. If you're giving them positive attention outside of when they're having tantrums, there's going to be much less of a need for them, or less likelihood for them to have tantrums on the basis of wanting your attention. I hope that's making sense. An extra challenge to do with this, just so that you're aware of it, is challenges on challenges, aren't they? research shows that parents are less likely to want to spend time with children who have a lot of difficult behavior. But the catch is, those are the kids where it would really help, okay? So if your child's really difficult, if they're having tantrums all the time, as soon as you get a break, you probably want to have some time to yourself to catch up on other stuff you needed to do, or to just have a breather because you're really stressed out. That unfortunately can get into a pattern where you end up, the only time that you're spending with your child is kind of putting out fires. So trying to, if you're dealing with heaps of difficult behavior, it means that a whole, 90% of the time you spend with your child is kind of tense. You need to try and gee, I feel bad saying this to parents, find time to build up quality time as well. All right, now it's not your fault, of course. It's not that you're deliberately choosing to not spend quality time with your kids. It's just that a lot of difficult behavior makes it hard to do that. All right, so that's what I wanted to say about quality time. Next, we're going to move on to managing stress. So, this is quite a sorry, I'll just go back for a sec. This is quite a tricky topic, okay? There's only so much I can tell you in the 5 or 7 minutes or something we're going to talk about managing stress. Actually, it'll be about 10 minutes. So just bear in mind that I'm perfectly aware this is going to be an inadequate treatment of this topic. So I'm going to do the best in the time that we have, okay? Obviously, managing stress is a huge topic in psychology and therapy in general. So first of all, think about your stress. Stress is different for everyone. Something that makes you stressed may not make the person next to you stressed, may not make your partner stressed. And it's important that you understand your own unique experience of stress. You'll have things like your own genes and stuff, your collection of a lifetime of experiences that influence how you experience stress. And look for patterns in those situations that cause you stress, and then use that to anticipate stress and manage it proactively. Okay, so this is going to be about you and your stress. Here's how we do that. Now, we're going to have a question here to discuss, and it's entirely optional, all right? Most of these questions I really encourage you to participate in. This one is entirely optional, so only if you feel comfortable. Share something about what stresses you in the chat box. Again, if it's something really serious, maybe don't share that because other people might find that distressing to hear about. But if it's something that you think most people might be able to relate to, feel free to share that in chat. And you'll be able to see what other people comment with just to get a sense of the range of things that cause stress for us. Certainly, tantrums would be an obvious one, right? But beyond that, you might have other situations, perhaps to do with being a parent, perhaps not. Maybe, when you have to cold call someone at work, it makes you really stressed. Or maybe, I don't know, catching public transport or traffic, or we've already got lots of good ideas coming through in the chat. I can see screaming kids. Yes, Doug, I feel you on that one. High stress job, Gabrielle. Trigger, Louise, you're concerned about not knowing what the trigger is? Ah, okay, we might be able to discuss that later if we get time. Jack, your stress is worse if other people are around and notice? Yes. Tantrums, yes, people commenting with tantrums, okay. Karen, when you feel that you're losing control, okay, or you don't have control. Good examples, everyone. Thank you for your contributions. We can see there's quite a lot of difference there, but some similarities too. So just in the handout for this week, we'll include a bit of an exercise in identifying the things that stress you. Now we're going to go through a kind of a little model of how stress works. So what we were just talking about are stressors with an OR on the end, stressors. But you just say it stresses, which lead to an impact on you, right? They might impact your thinking, your feeling, and your physical sensations. I'll go through that more in a second. And they'll then lead to some sort of action in response, what you do as a result of that stress. This is called a very, very basic cognitive behavioral model of stress. Okay? Now, we're going to go through, well, think about the impact of the stressor that you were thinking about in the exercise we just did when I asked that question, just in your own head, and see if you can identify what it does to your thinking. So, for example, if you've got screaming kids, what do you think? You might be thinking, I can't handle this noise, I wish they'd shut up, other people are judging me, or I'm getting a headache, whatever it would be. The feeling might be some sort of anxious feeling, maybe frustration, maybe anger. They might be natural feelings in those situations. And the physical sensation might be tension somewhere. Maybe you're getting, a stress headache. Maybe you're getting tightness in your chest. Maybe shakiness in your hands if you're getting really stressed. And then as an action, who knows, maybe you yell, maybe you decide to get out of the car and take a breather, maybe you turn the car around and go home. There might be some, or maybe it doesn't impact your action. So this is the general model that we want to talk about. Now let's expand on this now. Firstly, by focusing on the stressor a bit more. Sorry, no, we already did focus on the stressor, didn't we? Now we're going to go on to the action, so what you do as a result. Now there's two ways to manage this, and I've got ideas for both. We can play the long game, which is all about building up your resilience to stress, or we can play the short game, which is all about how you react to stress when it happens. Sorry, I think that's a bit of a golfing analogy. I don't know why I've got that in there. It just seemed like a logical way to do it. But just think about things that you do in the broader scheme of things, resilience, and in the moment when stress happens, your immediate reaction. The long game is all about lifestyle. So it's about the things you do even when you're not stressed that have a big impact on your stress levels. You may not realize this, maybe it's obvious to you. Some of these you might have heard of before. I'm just going to go through these quickly, and I'm sorry about the amount of text on the screen. I just wanted to give you a list of some things to consider that you might be able to change to help your stress levels. Firstly, quality time. We've just covered that in relation to how it helps your kids. It can actually also help with your own stress levels. So it can help you just as much as your kids. So that might be, doing something enjoyable with your family. It might be time to yourself, getting rid of the kids, get rid of the partner or whoever else you've got around, and just having some peace and quiet, doing nothing much in particular, instead of kind of rushing on to the next thing that you need to do. It might think about leisure activities. Do you get to do the things that you enjoy at all? If you never get to do anything that you enjoy, if you've had to give up a whole lot of your hobbies and things, obviously over time and when we become parents, our time for leisure activities gets cut down quite significantly. But if you're not doing anything for your own pleasure, see if that's something that you can prioritize. I'm kind of giving you a license to work that into your schedule as a result of this webinar. Think about work. If you have very stressful work, or if you're working excessive hours, or if work kind of comes home with you, that can have a big effect on stress levels. Friends, socializing is a good way of countering stress. That's very well established. Community can be very important. So connecting with your wider community can have a really beneficial impact. Things like people who go to church and talk to people there, that can really be beneficial. Going to a local club where you kind of get to know the local people, joining a local activity of some sort, basically joining other groups of people. Spirituality and philosophy can be useful if you're into that. Or exercise is a big one. Gee, exercise just comes up all the time, doesn't it? In these kind of, anytime you're trying to improve something, seems like exercise is in there somewhere. But it makes a big difference to stress levels. If you're not doing any exercise, think about it. Now the short game, what you can do in the moment. Well, I'm going to give you some ideas for this. We're going to go through these one by one. Firstly, you can use mindfulness skills and relaxation. If you don't know what those are, we're going to do a little practice in a second. 2, I'll talk to you about how to manage your own self-talk. You might have heard of that, maybe not, don't worry. And 3, change the stress triggers. That's actually going to be the next section. Okay? Now, mindfulness. People may have come across this. It's been very popular in the last 5 or so years, getting a lot of attention. Many kids these days are actually learning about it at school. I'm going to take you through a little exercise now. So I'm going to bring myself up on screen just to get your attention if you're kind of zoned out, because I'm going to change the pace at which I talk just for a couple of minutes. So don't be put off by that. There might be some silence. That's on purpose. It's because I'm going to teach you just a very brief kind of mindfulness meditation that is a basic thing that you can start doing and that will help your stress levels. If you're not into this kind of thing, just bear with me for a few moments, okay? So what we're going to do, this isn't any kind of spiritual thing. It's just a secular self-regulation strategy. So what I want you to do is sit up reasonably straight in your chair. You see, like these people are doing? Put your hands maybe in your lap. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. Otherwise, just kind of stare softly at a point in front of you without kind of really concentrating on it. If you've got TV on in the background or something, try turning that off. Then what you do is I want you to kind of just feel the weight of your body pushing down into the chair or the floor or wherever you are. And feel the weight of your arms hanging down from your shoulders, your hands in your lap. Get a general sense of how your body feels, the bits that are tense, the bits that are comfortable, just generally what it's like. Then just do 3 fairly deep breaths. So that's 1. That's 2. That's 3. Now what I want you to do is just direct your attention to your breathing. Really feel your breathing. Something that we take for granted, I want you to really notice it now in as much detail as possible. The in part, the out part, where you feel it most, maybe your nose, maybe your chest, and just keep following the breathing. Now you can do that for a few minutes and you might find that it's quite effective in calming you down. If your mind wanders and you forget to concentrate on your breathing, that's fine, that's normal. Just bring your attention back to your breathing. Now just bring your attention back to the room around you. And when you're ready, just open your eyes. So that's a very, very basic, very quick mindfulness meditation exercise. You could do that for, we did that in about 2.5 minutes. You could do that for 10 minutes if you wanted. It's the kind of thing, if you practice it consistently, you'll get the feeling of it, and that's something that you can draw on. I've been practicing it for quite a while, and if I get stressed, I can kind of tune in to my breathing without having to kind of close my eyes and stop what I'm doing. So I'm able to kind of redirect my attention, and by doing that, it takes my mind away from what's stressing me out, and it helps me to kind of stay present and focused and reduce the stress. So mindfulness, that's a great way of managing stress. If you're interested in doing more on that, there are many great apps available on mobiles, or you can Google it. There's an Australian government-supported free app called Smiling Mind, but I won't mention any of the others because many of them are commercial. Also think about humor as a way of managing stress. I won't say too much about this. A great way of doing it is find 3 or 4 YouTube videos that make you laugh. Save them on your YouTube playlist, and anytime you're feeling stressed, set aside 5 or 10 minutes to watch a few of them. Now make sure that this doesn't get out of hand where you're spending 2 hours watching YouTube when you're supposed to be doing something else. The idea is you use it purposefully, almost like taking medicine. I'm stressed, what do I do to calm down? I'll go and watch something funny on YouTube, and it can be quite effective in changing your mood quite quickly. Cat videos, Paul, classic. Can't beat them. All right, now we've got to talk about self-talk. You may have heard of self-talk. It's basically the idea that we're kind of commentating on our lives in our own heads as we go through our day. Like right now you might be thinking, I wonder what's on TV, or this is the most fascinating talk I've ever been to. Those are probably the most likely ones. That was a little bit of a joke. But they can come in 2 categories. They can be helpful or unhelpful. Particularly we're interested in noticing the unhelpful ones and seeing if we can shift them more towards helpful ones. So here's just an example, right? Suppose this is you in the shopping centre, you're stressed, your child's causing difficulties. She's not quite having a full-on tantrum here, is she? But she's being difficult somehow. And you might have some self-talk going on. Firstly, let's have a look at the unhelpful side. I was going to get you guys to have a guess at what you, or suggest what you think might be going through this mum's mind as she's trying to deal with her child's difficult behaviour, but it might take a little bit too long. So here's just some ideas on the screen. So that would be unhelpful. And you can see how if you had that going on in your head, if that's what you're thinking, the impact of that on the way you're feeling is going to be pretty negative, right? You're going to be feeling pretty bad if you're having those thoughts. Derek's our facilitator, has just shared some more information from Raising Children Network on mindfulness as well. Now, some more helpful thoughts that might occur in this situation would be, most people aren't too bothered. Everyone's kids have tantrums. This is normal. I can manage this. It's just a tantrum. No one's dying. It's not the end of the world. And you can see how that kind of self-talk is going to have a much more positive impact on your the way you're feeling and your stress levels. Now, of course, I don't want to sound condescending. I know it's not as simple as just deciding to have better self-talk. But really what I want you to take away from this is just more awareness of your own self-talk, and you might be able to catch yourself when it's really getting out of hand. I can sometimes do that if I'm having really unhelpful self-talk, and a lot of it I'm kind of like, whoa, it's a bit extreme, let's just not get into that. And I can tone it back a bit. You might be able to do the same if you're aware of it. I think awareness is power, really, isn't it? Okay. That's all I want to say about self-talk. And remember, to come back to the analogy of the rock with the waves washing up against it and not being moved, this is generally kind of the direction we want to head in. Now, I don't mean that you're not ever to be emotional. In fact, showing emotions in front of your children and explaining them is a really positive thing. But you do want to kind of show that you're stable in the face of life's ups and downs. So even if you're really upset at the moment, it's possible to explain, got something stressful going on, I'll be okay. So we're not saying you need to be completely unemotional, just that everything's sort of basically okay. That's the message that you want to send to your child. And that whatever's getting to you at the moment isn't going to be a long-term thing. This is in general, not necessarily when your child's having a tantrum, by the way. All right, next topic. Let's keep it moving along. High-risk situations. This is a recap of what we had earlier, but adding a little bit more on. So I'm particularly talking about the situations that get you stressed, which might be the same ones where your child's particularly likely to have a tantrum because that's what's stressing them out. But also it could be broader than that. So we have this slide in session 1, and we might have had it in another one too. But the idea is you can develop what we call a planned activities routine for situations that are particularly problematic for you. So some people, I'm trying to think of situations that people said cause them stress, things like going places in the car is a classic one. I'll use that because I think lots of people can relate. You can develop a plan for that situation. So this involves applying the skills that we've learned in this course, right? Choosing an interesting activity for your child. This is a replacement behavior or something that's just generally diverting their attention, keeping them occupied. That was the first one. Second, have a plan for what behaviors you do want and what you don't want. Might sound obvious, but I want you to think through it in detail. Remember, use the telephone test to make sure you're being really specific. At the shops, Paul, great example. So this is something you're doing ahead of time, remember. No use trying to do this once the tantrum's already happened. Go back to session 4 for how to deal with that. This is planning ahead of time, and this kind of thinking is what's going to help you in the long term. Think about positive consequences for the behavior you do want. Think about negative consequences for the behavior you don't want. That's if child behavior is even an issue in this stressful situation. I'm assuming it is because that would be most relevant. But you could do it, you could leave those points out if it doesn't involve child behavior. And finally, a really important one, practice in a lower risk situation. Remember how last session we were talking about building up skills in your child for better behavior? That really relates to this. You don't just wait till the difficult situation comes along. You make sure that they've got all the sequence down pat before you get into it. So once you decide what behaviors you do want, make sure that your child can do them. Check that it's like second nature for them. Make sure they kind of understand what you're hoping for and that there might be a positive consequence if it happens that way. So this is kind of like your battle stations planning, right? This is getting ready for battle. You get anyone else who's involved on board, grit your teeth and say, right, how are we going to deal with this nightmare of a situation where we get a ton of tantrums, or I get real stressed, or you get real stressed. Let's get our thinking caps on and make sure we're going in with a plan, not just turning up and hoping for the best. That's all I wanted to have for high-risk situations, to prompt you to think through it systematically and have a plan. And I want to make sure that we're on the same page about using rules effectively. This is the last topic for tonight. We have gone over this before, so I've got it labeled as a recap, but that was way back in session 1. We went through it pretty quickly. I'm just going to check that you're on the same page as this. It'll be in the handout as well. The main thing with household rules is not to put too much hope that rules are going to do anything on their own. That's a trap that sometimes parents get into. It's saying, well, it's a rule, so you have to do it. doesn't really work like that. Rules are more about kind of a social contract between you and your child. You see this third point down? I wonder if I can highlight it. I don't think that's been working. No. That third point down, agreed on by you and your child, negotiate. This is something that parents often don't do, and it depends on the age of your child. If they're under 3, it's not going to be all that productive. But if they're even as young as 3, depending on how verbal they are, you can talk to them about what the rules are and say, if you do the wrong thing, what do you think should happen? Or if anyone does the wrong thing, what do you think should happen? And make it specific to particular behaviors. So, for example, if you scream at me while we go shopping, what do you think should happen? And they might say, well, I don't get a treat or something. And you can then negotiate, and you might have your own ideas and say, well, I think it's a bit more serious than that. What about if you miss out on 15 minutes of iPad time or something like that? And make sure they're applied consistently, okay? So I think I've covered that last time pretty thoroughly, but basically don't make empty threats. They're worthless and, in fact, counterproductive a lot of the time because they teach your child that you're not serious about the rules. If you can't be consistent about it and really follow through, don't bother setting that rule. It's not going to help. Now, what about if you decided to set this as a rule? Is that going to be a good idea? I'll tell you the answer, no. No one should have that as a rule in their household. The reasons are, firstly, that's nowhere near specific enough, right? Remember how I got you to think specifically about behaviour in session 2? Was that session? No, that was session 3, sorry. So it's not specific enough. Secondly, a child may not know what a tantrum is or be entirely clear on it. And third, I really want you to think about what is problematic about the tantrum. So is it that they're hitting? Is it that they're yelling? Is it that they're not listening and following your instructions? Is it that they're interfering with what other people are doing and making it hard for them? So those would be valid targets for the rules, no hitting. But try not to set no tantrums as a rule. We need to be more specific than that. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions about rules. I'm happy to go through your rules with you if you have them. That's all the formal content that we needed to get through for this session. As always, we have a feedback survey that we're really keen for you to fill out if you have time. Derek, our facilitator, has shared that in chat. It should also, if you're on a computer, open automatically in your browser when I end the session in a few minutes, well, 5 or 6 minutes time. But we look at them every week, so it's a new survey every week, similar questions, but we're really interested in your feedback on each session. And I'm particularly interested in this session. I personally think it's one of the most important sessions, and it's one where this content tends to be lacking a bit in lots of parenting programs that I come across. So please do, if you have to go now, follow that link to the survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback. We've had a good turnout tonight, so hopefully a few of you have time to fill that out. I understand that you're busy though. Start sending your questions through in the chat. I'm just going to go over the wrapping up stuff and then we'll get on to questions, if you can hang around. This is just the practical tips, which we might come back to if people need them. Next session, our last session, is next week, 7:30 Tuesday night, Australian Eastern Time, where we're going to talk about a complete approach for your family. Hopefully I can give you some more guidance on your particular issues as well in that session. Recordings will be available later this week. So I'm just going to mute my microphone for a minute or two. Stick around if you can for questions. You might find something that is relevant to you even if you didn't think of it yourself. So I'll stop talking just for a minute or two and then start discussing questions. All right, let's get into this. We've had some good questions, and I'll keep an eye on chat if you want to keep asking them as well. So Vicky, you had a question about getting individualized help. So I've brought this back up on screen. Now I know you said you've had trouble or limited success with people helping you so far. And you've been told that the tantrums, it sounds like, are developmentally normal, but you're still struggling and you're not sure who else to ask for help. If you can't get help kind of over the phone, I would suggest face-to-face. You've mentioned you were able to see a pediatrician. Should be possible to get a referral to a psychologist, which would be a great way to go, particularly one who's experienced in working with children. This would not be an area that's surprising to them, so there should be many psychologists around. It's possible that I'm a little biased towards psychologists given that I am one, but the best I can do for that is suggest go to a GP and ask for a referral. Would probably be the best way to do it. I hope that's useful to you. I'll come back to you in a sec. Gricha, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Gricha, you said you had a question about my example of no iPad. Would that be a punishment, or is that more of an agreement or a promise? Well, I haven't really used the word punishment in this course. So we've more talked about consequences, haven't we? We've talked about positive consequences and negative consequences. Positive consequences as things that make the behavior more likely to happen next time. Negative ones make it less likely to happen. So something like removing access to privileges is one of those negative consequences that we discussed in session 4 and very briefly in session 1. So Gritche, I would suggest you go back to session 4 and rewatch that section on negative consequences. So the no iPad would be an example of a negative consequence. Lucy, you're seeking some advice on consequences for doing the wrong thing for a 2-year-old. That's quite a broad question. I'll do my best. I think your best option here is also to go back and rewatch session 4. You'll get a link to that in the email as we send out. We send a link to all the sessions when we send out those emails. It really depends on the purpose of the behavior. So you need to go through the whole sequence that we discuss in this course of looking at triggers, behaviors, consequences, trying to work out the purpose of the behavior, designing a response based on that so that it's tailored to the particular purpose. So you're going to want some sort of consequences. We went through things like timeout in session 4. That could be relevant to you, but I really suggest you rewatch that. Some other questions or comments. Let's see what we've got. Okay. Something's gone weird with my chat box. No, I think I can tell what most of you are saying. All right. Paul, you've got a question about a positive consequence. If your daughter stays with you, we get to go to the park later. That is a valid positive consequence. It depends a bit on the age of your daughter. Ideally, it's good to have a positive consequence that's a bit more immediate. Depends on when going to the park is. So if that's going to be hours later and your daughter's 3 or 4, it may not be soon enough for it to be kind of valid in her kind of... It's hard for young kids to delay gratification like that. They often need a more immediate response. So you could say, in session 4, we talked about setting up a token economy, which is where you use things like stickers or little bits of whatever junk you've got that come to represent basically good behavior, and they get one whenever they do the right thing, and they add up to a positive consequence. So that's a way of saying, all right, you get the little token now. That's an immediate response that the child can feel good about and hang on to. It's a tangible reminder of what they've earned. Then once they reach 5 or 10 or something, you take them on a trip to the park. So that would be an option there. Karen, you have a question about dealing with complete meltdowns. This course is definitely relevant to that. So beyond building on what we've already covered in earlier sessions, the main things I would say are, well, what we've covered in this session. It sounds like that could be very hard to deal with. You said your daughter is very emotional and that's a factor. There, it is quite important that you manage your own stress levels and your own emotional responses. So it's particularly important that you don't get very emotional in response. Try and stay as calm as possible. Of course, try and keep your children safe. But again, I would go, really the whole of the course is highly relevant to that situation. Shannon, you had a question? That is an excellent question, Shannon, about, all right, your question was, should you use the mindful techniques during a tantrum episode? So, for example, mummy takes a time out, ignores the behavior for a moment, and takes stock. That is an excellent question because I think I probably should have clarified that a bit more. The mindfulness techniques, the meditation process that I took you through is going to be very hard to do while your child's having a tantrum. So sitting there, closing your eyes, focusing on your breathing, that full process. That's more something that you could do on your own time while your child's calm and possibly not even in the room, maybe in the evening, early in the morning, something like that. That is kind of building up the skill of being able to tune into your breathing, okay? Then in the moment, all you do is it's kind of a conscious awareness thing. So you just tune into your breathing. You don't have to stop what you're doing. You just kind of take a deep breath, pay attention to your breathing for a moment, and that may help calm you, particularly if you've done the background work in building up that skill, all right? There is a lot you can do on mindfulness. It might be something that it's worth Googling. Check out also that Raising Children Network link that Derek shared earlier. That's going to give you some quality information on it. But it is also relevant to take a time out if you need to in a self-care sense. I mentioned that in one of the previous sessions. It's actually very relevant to tonight as well. If you're getting overly stressed, it is perfectly acceptable to remove yourself from the situation momentarily, to help yourself have a breather and to enable you to then respond in the way you want to, particularly if things are escalating and you're both getting very upset. Provided your child's safe, they're not around anything dangerous or they're not likely to hurt themselves in some way. Christina, how early can the strategies discussed in these sessions be applied? What age groups? My position on that is really any age where tantrums have started. So tantrums are, we went over that in session, I think it was session 1 and 2. If it's just kind of, if it's crying in, say, a newborn, we wouldn't call that a tantrum. A tantrum is a particular kind of extreme sort of behavior that is not just emotional crying, right? It usually involves things like kicking and screaming and hitting. So you wouldn't see that typically in a very young kid. The main age of onset, or where tantrums are worst is around ages kind of 1.5 to 4. Hope that helps. Gonna have to go in a second. We might do one or two more questions. If you have to go now, I encourage you to do the survey if you've got time. All right, so Louisa, you got a good question about siblings. I might comment on that one. So your little one bites his sister. So the sister kind of annoys him, makes him frustrated, and then your son bites to try and get her to stop. So you've actually got two problem behaviors happening there, right? The kind of teasing or annoying, and then the biting in response. She says she didn't do anything, she may have a different understanding of what doing anything means, but it's perfectly appropriate. You may have realized that you can apply this general process that we've gone through in this course with very little modification to other kinds of problem behaviors too. So you may be able to work out the purpose of that difficult behavior from her. You may be able to work out a replacement behavior, and you may be able to apply consequences and do the same thing for your son. So it doesn't really matter how much difficult behavior you've got going on at the same time. The process that we go through in this course still applies and still works. This means you've got double trouble, really. It's just more work for you, and it's going to take extra effort to make it work. All right, we probably better go there. Thank you for your questions, folks. Thank you for your participation. Next week, as I always encourage you, come with particularly any comments about how you're going with this approach. If you're trying to use time out or something and it's not working, or you're trying to, your instead behavior doesn't seem to be happening at all, your replacement behavior, or you don't have a way of tracking the tantrums over time and you just can't seem to stick to it, or you're not sure what skills to teach. Any questions like that, we'll try and go through and help you sort out. All right, folks, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday evening and indeed the rest of your week. I'm going to end the session there. If you haven't done the survey, it should load in your browser. Otherwise, have a great week and I'll see you next time.